At my sister Savannah's lavish engagement party, she pointed at me and sneered to her fiancé. "This is Luna, the family's failed chef." Then she leaned in, hissing in my ear, "That cheap dress, did Mom have to give you the money for it?" She didn't know that the bill for this entire party was on me. And I'm Luna Vance, 29 years old. And at my sister Savannah's lavish engagement party, she pointed at me and sneered to her fiancé, This is Luna, the family's failed chef." Then she leaned in, hissing in my ear, "That cheap dress, did Mom have to give you the money for it?" She didn't know that the bill for this entire party was on me. But that revelation would have to wait. First, I had to survive the evening. Ace and I stood under the awning of Le Ciel, taking a deep, fortifying breath as my heart hammered against my ribs. The familiar scent of lavender and rosemary from the small, curated garden. By the entrance, a detail I had insisted upon in the design, did little to calm my nerves. This was my territory, my creation, but tonight I was an intruder in my own kingdom. I pushed through the heavy oak doors, the weight of them a familiar comfort. And inside, the soft notes of a taille Clair de Lune drifted from a grand piano. The warm golden light from crystal chandeliers washed over tables draped in pristine white linen. It was exactly as I had envisioned it, an oasis of understated elegance in the heart of Los Angeles. Julian, my loyal manager, approached in his impeccable suit, his eyes lighting up with genuine warmth and respect. He opened his mouth, the word "a chef" already forming on his lips, but a quick, subtle glance from me stopped him. He understood immediately. His professional mask slipped back into place, his tone becoming formal, almost distant. "Ningbam Chao," he said, his voice perfectly neutral. "The Vance party is this way." He led me past the low hum of chic diners, their conversations punctuated by the clinking of glasses. He guided me to the best table in the house, a semi-private booth with a panoramic view of the city lights. And there they were, my family seated like royalty, already judging the world from their throne. Chan, my father, Richard Vance, looked up from his phone, a device that seemed surgically attached to his hand. He offered a curt, dismissive nod before his eyes returned to the glowing screen, my presence a mere footnote in his evening of mergers and acquisitions. My mother, Eleanor, gifted me one of her flawless society page smiles. It was a masterpiece of cosmetic engineering, but her eyes, cold and appraising, did the real talking. They scanned me from head to toe, lingering for a fraction of a second on my simple black dress, and the slightest, almost imperceptible frown creased her brow. "Hentit aho, Luna, darling," she cooed, her voice a confection of sweet, chilling condescension. "I was so worried you wouldn't make it. The traffic from that side of town must have been dreadful." In that side of town, my small, functional apartment in Koreatown, a world away from their Beverly Hills mansion. My brother, Carter, the hedge fund prodigy, didn't even bother to look up, his focus entirely on some chart on his own device. He'd always been mortified by my career choice, as if my working with my hands somehow tarnished the family name. And then there was Savannah, the star of the evening, radiant in a designer dress that probably cost more than my rent for a year. She rose and enveloped me in a stiff air-kiss embrace. The cloying scent of her Chanel No. 5 was suffocating. She pulled back, her smile wide and predatory. "Nanks, you made it," she exclaimed, her voice loud enough for her fiancé, Preston, to hear clearly. "I was so worried you wouldn't find a decent place to change." Chuan, the jab landed, sharp and precise, a public announcement of my supposed poverty. I said nothing, a skill I had perfected over a lifetime of such small, cruel cuts. Ian Preston, a smug man poured into a Tom Ford suit, eyed me with the casual curiosity one might afford a strange piece of furniture. "Savannah, darling, you haven't introduced me to your sister." And Savannah let out a brittle laugh, a sound devoid of any real joy. "Oh, honey, this is Luna," she said, drawing out the introduction for maximum effect. "The family's failed chef." She pronounced the word chef as if it were something distasteful, something one finds stuck to the bottom of their shoe. Then, leaning in close, she lowered her voice to a venomous hiss, her breath a hot wave of champagne against my ear. "That cheap dress, did Mom have to give you the money for it? Don't worry, Preston's brother is covering the check tonight, so feel free to eat whatever you want." Anne and I remained silent. I could feel my heart being squeezed by an invisible hand, the familiar ache of being worthless in their eyes spreading through my chest. But as I met my own reflection in the polished surface of a water goblet, I saw that the hurt in my eyes had already begun to crystallize. It was hardening into something cold, something sharp, something like ice. A Sydney waiter, one of my own staff, placed a leather-bound menu in front of me. I ran my fingers over the embossed logo of Le Ciel, my logo. The weight of it in my hands was a silent counter-narrative to their insults. It was real. It was mine. They don't know, I thought, a cold calm settling over me. They don't know that every dish they're about to criticize, every ingredient they're about to slander, carries a piece of my soul. Fine, let the play begin. The cool, heavy glass of my wine goblet felt like an anchor to the present, but my mind had already drifted far away, back to the cavernous Vance mansion in Beverly Hills. It was a house, but it was never a home. It was a collection of separate, competing kingdoms, each ruled with an iron fist. The grand living room, a sterile expanse of Italian marble and imposing abstract art, was my mother's stage. It was a place for performances where she hosted her meticulously planned charity teas for other women with too much time, too much money, and not enough purpose. They would sip Earl Grey from porcelain cups and discuss fundraising galas, their laughter echoing emptily in the high-ceilinged space. On the library, paneled in dark, imposing cherry wood and smelling of old leather and my father's expensive cigars, was his undisputed realm. This was a fortress of power, a place where he negotiated multi-million-dollar real estate deals that shaped the Los Angeles skyline. His voice, a low, authoritative rumble, was the only sound that dared to challenge the room's tomb-like silence. Then there was the music room, a bright, sunlit space that housed a gleaming Steinway & Sons grand piano. That kingdom belonged exclusively to Savannah. The air there was always filled with the sound of her meticulously practiced concertos, flawless, technical, and utterly devoid of soul. And my world was downstairs, in the kitchen. It was a vast, professional-grade space with stainless steel countertops and a formidable 8-burner stove, a place none of my family ever entered. To them, it was the service level, the engine room, a place of labor, not of sophisticated leisure. It was the territory of the hired help, and therefore a place to be ignored, a source of unspoken shame. But for me, it was a sanctuary. It was the only place in that entire hollow mansion that felt like home. It was the kingdom of Dolores, our gentle, kind-eyed housekeeper who had come from Mexico years before I was born. On my childhood memories weren't of ski trips to Aspen or languid summers in the Hamptons, like Savannah's were. My memories were sensory snapshots, captured and preserved from that basement kitchen. The warm, spicy scent of Dolores's gingerbread cookies baking in the commercial oven. A smell that meant safety and comfort. The sharp, clean aroma of cilantro and fresh lime as she taught me the secret to her mother's slow-cooked pork. Her weathered hands moving with an inherited grace and love. Her soft, accented English was the soundtrack to my youth, a language of genuine comfort and unconditional care. After a long, exhausting day at a private school where I felt like an imposter among the true thoroughbreds, she was the only one who would look me in the eye and ask, "Rihi, how was your day, my dear?" And she was the only one who ever truly wanted to know the answer. Anne and I was 14 when I first tasted the full bitter truth of my family's spectacular indifference. I had poured my entire being into a single creation, my California Sunshine Orange Chiffon cake. I had spent weeks in the library, not my father's, but the public one, poring over cookbooks, experimenting with ratios, adjusting sugar levels, and staying up until the early hours of the morning, my fingers perpetually stained with orange zest. And I won. First place in the Los Angeles County baking competition. And I remember standing on that small, rickety stage in the community hall, the cheap, satiny fabric of the blue ribbon, a mark of supreme honor against my chest, the gaudy plastic trophy feeling like solid, heavy gold in my trembling hands. My eyes, wide with hope, scanned the sea of proud, beaming parents in the audience, searching desperately, foolishly for a single familiar face. They weren't there. Later, through a casual, offhand remark from my mother's assistant, I learned my parents had been at a Sotheby's art auction that evening. Savannah had a private dressage lesson, an auction and a horse. That's what my victory, my passion, my soul poured into a cake was worth to them. And but someone did come. Dolores. Her long shift had ended hours before, but she had taken 2 city buses across town in the drizzling, dreary rain just to be there. She found me sitting alone on the cold, hard bleachers. Long after the ceremony had ended and the hall had emptied, she didn't say much, she didn't need to. She just wrapped me in her warm, comforting embrace, her old, worn apron still smelling faintly of bleach and sweet cinnamon. In her hand, she held a single perfect pink rose, one she had furtively snipped from my mother's prize-winning, meticulously manicured rose garden. That night, I cried in her arms, not from the sadness of being forgotten, but from the overwhelming, soul-shaking gratitude of being seen. I came home and threw the trophy in the back of my closet, and not a single member of my family ever asked me about it. And the final, defining wound, the one that set the course for the rest of my life, came when I was 18. I received my acceptance letter to the Culinary Institute of America, the CIA, the most prestigious, most revered culinary school in the country. My hands were trembling as I walked into my father's library, the letter clutched like a holy scripture, a validation of everything I was. Richard Vance was reviewing a stack of blueprints, a thick cigar smoldering in a crystal ashtray beside him. He didn't look up. As I began to explain, my voice filled with a hope so fragile it felt like it could shatter into a million pieces. He cut me off. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes were as cold and hard as the polished granite on his desk. "Benia Luna," he said, his voice flat and utterly final. "Javants are not servers. We are the ones who are served." "Cooking? Ew!" He waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away an annoying fly. "Re-honor is for the help. For people like Dolores, you will attend UCLA. You will get a business degree. That is the end of this discussion." The cruelty of it stole my breath. It wasn't just the blunt rejection of my dream. It was the casual, brutal way he equated my passion with a servant's station, lumping me in with the woman I loved and respected most in the world, as if we were one and the same. The help. A scar was carved into my heart that day, a permanent reminder of my designated place in the Vance family hierarchy. I was and would always be downstairs. An eye blinked, the painful memory dissolving, the sharp edges of it softening as I focused on the present. I was back at Le Ciel, the murmur of the restaurant, a low, comforting thrum around me. I looked at the glass of deep red Cabernet Sauvignon in front of me, its color like blood and velvet, rich and complex. And my father was right about one thing. Cooking is for serving. And tonight, I would serve him a lesson he would never forget. The night I walked out of that mansion, my father's final words echoed in the cavernous foyer. If you walk out that door, don't expect a single dime. I didn't. I walked out with one suitcase, my small savings account, and a resolve as hard and cold as the marble floors I left behind. And the next 5 years were a blur of fire, sweat, and tears. I plunged into the brutal, unforgiving world of professional kitchens, starting at the very bottom rung in Chef Antoine's celebrated but notoriously difficult restaurant. He was a tyrant, a culinary dictator who ruled his kitchen like a battlefield. 18-hour days were the norm. The searing heat from the ovens was a constant assault. The air was thick with the cacophony of clattering pans, the relentless rhythm of chopping knives, and Chef Antoine's explosive, French-accented curses. My arms became a roadmap of my education, a chaotic tapestry of fresh burns laid over the faded silver of old ones. My hands, once soft, grew calloused and tough. Ianyungi lived in a cramped, stuffy studio apartment in Koreatown. The pungent, ever-present smell of fermenting kimchi from the restaurant downstairs clung to everything I owned, a constant, ironic counterpoint to the delicate flavors I dreamed of creating. There was no money for a car. The city bus was my chauffeur. My diet consisted mainly of cheap bread and peanut butter, every saved dollar funneled into essentials. A set of razor-sharp Japanese knives, expensive culinary textbooks, and the occasional wine-tasting course I couldn't really afford, but knew I needed. Exhaustion was my constant companion. I'd fall asleep on the bus ride home, my head lolling against the grimy window, dreaming not of rest, but of new recipes, of flavor combinations no one had ever tried before. There was one night, about a year in, that I almost broke. I was running a high fever, a fresh burn on my forearm throbbing with a life of its own. I felt small, utterly alone, and buried under the weight of my choices. In a moment of weakness, a desperate childish longing for comfort, I called home. My mother, Eleanor, answered. Hearing my hoarse, weak voice, she didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask if I needed anything. Instead, she sighed, a long, dramatic exhalation of pity and vindication. "Oh, my poor darling girl," she began, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "You see, I told you, that world out there isn't for you. It's too harsh. Just come home, Luna. Apologize to your father. I'll speak to Mrs. Henderson. Her son, the ENT doctor, just finalized his divorce. He's a very nice man. You won't have to work anymore." The words, meant to sound like a lifeline, felt like a noose. The offer wasn't one of rescue, but of erasure. She wanted to erase my struggle, my ambition, my entire identity, and replace it with a good match. She saw my passion, not as a calling, but as a dirty, unpleasant phase I needed to get over. In that single chilling moment, Any lingering foolish hope I had that they might one day understand, that they might one day be proud, was extinguished forever. I realized then that my family would never be a safe harbor. It was just a gilded cage I had finally escaped. I hung up the phone and never called again. In the turning point, the first real glimmer of light came after 18 grueling months. 18 months of relentless work, of being broken down and built back up again. Chef Antoine summoned me to his small, cluttered office. He, the famously severe Frenchman who rarely gave compliments, pointed a stern finger at a plate on his desk. It was my creation, pan-seared scallops with a delicate saffron cream sauce. I had made it for the staff meal, a small act of creative rebellion. He had tasted it. He picked up his fork, took another small bite, and closed his eyes for a long moment. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully. Then he opened his eyes and looked directly at me, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "And now this," he said, his gruff voice low and resonant. "This has soul." And he let the words hang in the air for a moment, the highest praise a chef could receive from him. He then gestured dismissively at the kitchen. "Tomorrow you are sous chef, and second in command." The promotion was a seismic shift, a validation that went far beyond a new title or a raise I desperately needed. It was the first time in years I felt truly seen, recognized not for my name or my potential as someone's wife, but for the one thing that was purely, undeniably mine, my talent. That night, after service, I stood in the dark, grimy alley behind the restaurant, leaning against the cold brick wall, surrounded by dumpsters. And I wept. Not tears of sadness or exhaustion, but of profound, gut-wrenching relief. It was the emotional release of an achievement earned, of a victory won, acknowledged at last by the one person whose respect I had fought so hard to gain. It and I had done it, alone. Only but no, I thought, wiping the tears from my face with the back of my rough hand. I wasn't truly alone. It and I stood in that dark alley, not because I was alone, but because I was finally processing that I wasn't. My journey, the one my family had dismissed as a foolish, lonely crusade, hadn't been a solitary one after all. While the family I was born into had offered nothing but a litany of scorn and a series of ultimatums, I had, without realizing it, built another one. A family forged in the heat of the kitchen fires and bound by a fierce, unspoken loyalty. A family of my own choosing. Chef Antoine was its stern, demanding patriarch. He was more than a boss. He was the professional father figure my own had refused to be. My father saw my passion as a social liability, a stain on the pristine Vance name. But Chef Antoine, with his world-weary eyes, saw it for what it was, raw, unpolished potential. His methods were nothing short of brutal. I will never forget the time he tasted a risotto I had made for a VIP table. His face darkened. He declared it was a half-minute undercooked. And in one swift, terrifying motion, he threw the entire porcelain plate into the industrial trash can, where it shattered with a deafening clatter. Humiliation washed over me, my face burning hot in front of the entire kitchen staff. I thought I would be fired, but later that night, long after everyone else had gone and the kitchen was quiet, he found me silently scrubbing down my station. He didn't apologize. That wasn't his way. Instead, he pulled up a metal stool, took a handful of raw arborio rice from the pantry, and spent the next hour teaching me how to feel the exact moment a grain was perfectly al dente, simply by rolling it between my thumb and forefinger. "Sinenzane, a recipe is a map, not a destination," he'd said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. You don't cook with your hands, Luna. You cook with your heart and your mind. They will tell you when it is ready. He taught me about steel trap discipline, about the religion of split-second precision, and about an absolute, unwavering respect for the ingredients themselves. He was the one who, seeing my talent begin to outgrow the confines of his kitchen, loaned me the money for an advanced course in molecular gastronomy. There was no paperwork, no interest, no contract, just a firm handshake and a gruff, "Sandhya, don't disappoint me." It was a gesture of faith my own father had never been capable of. And then there was Julian, my partner in crime, my brother in arms. He had started as a line cook alongside me, another ambitious young chef with fire in his belly, dreaming of bigger things. Our friendship wasn't forged over cocktails or at country clubs. It was built in the grueling trenches of the dinner rush. We'd wake up at 4 a.m. to drive to the Santa Monica Farmers Market in his beat-up pickup truck, fighting with other chefs over the freshest bunches of wild arugula and the sweetest, sun-ripened heirloom tomatoes. We survived grueling double shifts fueled by nothing but adrenaline and burnt, cheap coffee. I remember us sitting on overturned milk crates in that same back alley, exhausted and sore, sharing the last of a stale baguette and a single bottle of water, sketching out our dream restaurant on a grease-stained napkin. He believed in the vision of Le Ciel before it was anything more than a fantasy. He was the one who stayed up all night with me for weeks, hunched over my tiny apartment table, helping me write the business plan, design the menu, and scout for affordable locations. He was the brother that Carter, with his cold indifference and Wall Street ambitions, could never be. Anne, the final piece of this chosen family, the catalyst who turned the dream into a reality, was a man named Mr. Miller, a retired tech investor and a quiet regular at Chef Antoine's restaurant. He was an observant man who always dined alone at the corner table. One night, he ate a dish I had poured my soul into creating, a miso-glazed black cod that I had spent months perfecting. At the end of his meal, he requested to see the chef who had prepared it. I remember walking out to his table, my heart pounding, nervous and sweating under the hot lights, my white apron stained with beet juice and God knows what else. To my utter astonishment, Mr. Miller, a man of considerable wealth and influence, stood up as I approached. It was a simple gesture of respect I had never been afforded in my own home. He shook my hand firmly, his grip surprisingly strong. "In young lady," he said, his eyes kind but piercingly intelligent, seeing right through my stained apron and my exhaustion. "I've eaten all over the world. Your food doesn't just taste good, it tells a story. I don't invest in food, I invest in artists." He paused, letting the word hang in the air, a stark, beautiful contrast to my father's damning verdict. "And you," he declared, his voice full of conviction, "are an artist. Call me when you're ready to build your own empire." That word artist echoed in my mind now, a warm, validating hum. It was the highest form of praise, a recognition of the soul I poured into my work, the very soul my family refused to see. I felt a surge of profound gratitude for these men, the demanding teacher, the loyal brother, the insightful believer, who had seen me when my own family had chosen to be blind. Then the memory faded, and the bitter reality of the present snapped back into focus. I was at my table in Le Ciel, a place built on their unwavering belief in me. Across from me, my actual family was staring at the first course I had sent out, a delicate Hokkaido scallop tartare with osetra caviar and a light yuzu mist. My sister, Savannah, was wrinkling her nose in theatrical disgust. My mother was shaking her head with a look of polite, unbearable pity. Nan artist, I thought, a bitter smile touching my lips as I watched their tired performance of disdain. And to them, I was just the help. The play continued, and I became a silent spectator to my own execution. The first course arrived, carried out with the silent, practiced grace of my well-trained staff. It was one of Le Ciel's signature dishes, delicate Hokkaido scallop tartare, topped with a glistening pearl of Osetra caviar, all resting in a chilled pool of fragrant yuzu mist. It was a dish that was both simple and incredibly complex, a balance of textures and flavors that had taken me months to perfect. Savannah poked at it with the tip of her silver fork, as if it were a strange, potentially hostile life form. She wrinkled her nose, a perfect performance of distaste. "Oh goodness, it's raw," she announced, her voice carrying across the table. "Luna, are you still into these weird things? I really don't think this pairs well with Dom Perignon." My mother, Eleanor, ever the supportive chorus, nodded in agreement. "She's right, darling, it's a bit adventurous. A classic shrimp cocktail would have been so much more elegant, don't you think?" A Rhône classic shrimp cocktail, the staple of every soulless country club and hotel banquet hall in America. They had no idea that the dish they were dismissing had been praised by a critic from Food and Wine magazine as a sublime symphony of the sea. I said nothing. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, the cool liquid doing nothing to quench the fire starting to smolder in my gut. I watched them push the delicate scallops around their plates, untouched. In the main course was next. It was my masterpiece, the dish that had earned Mr. Miller's attention. Alaskan black cod, slow-cooked for 48 hours, until it was impossibly tender, served with a tangy miso and blood orange glaze, over a bed of slender white asparagus. The skin was crisped to perfection, a crackling counterpoint to the buttery, yielding flesh beneath. In Preston, the fiancé made a show of carving into his portion. He took a bite, chewed with an exaggerated, thoughtful expression, and then dramatically placed his fork and knife down on his plate with a soft clatter. He looked around the table, a smug look on his face, as if he had discovered a fundamental flaw in the universe. "Excuse me," he called out, snapping his fingers to get a waiter's attention. The gesture, so arrogant and dismissive, made my jaw tighten. The waiter, a young man named Ben, hurried over. "There seems to be a mistake," Preston said loudly. "This fish is undercooked. It's still raw in the middle. Please take it back and have the chef cook it properly." Ben looked horrified, his eyes darting to me in a silent, panicked appeal. I gave him a nearly imperceptible nod, my face an unreadable mask. He reluctantly took the plate. My father, who had been silent up to this point, finally sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. He looked at me, not with anger, but with a weary sort of pity that was infinitely worse. "Luna, I don't understand why you would spend your money at a place that can't even cook a piece of fish correctly. It's wasteful." Wasteful. A hot, furious wave of anger surged through me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I gripped the stem of my wine glass, my knuckles turning white. I had worked 18-hour days for this. I had scars on my arms for this. I had poured 5 years of my life, my very soul, into learning how to cook that piece of fish correctly, and they, in their blissful, cocooned ignorance, had dismissed it all in a single breath. I forced the anger down, compressing it into a hard, cold diamond in my chest. And throughout the meal, the conversation circled relentlessly back to one central theme: my perceived failure. The questions about money were relentless, disguised as casual, loving concern. "And this place must be terribly expensive, Luna," my mother would say, her eyes wide with feigned worry. "And I bet that job at whatever diner you're at doesn't even cover a bottle of water here," Carter chimed in, his first and only contribution to the conversation, his voice laced with the casual cruelty of someone who has never worried about a bill in his life. Shen Savannah, of course, delivered the final blows. "You must have blown all your savings on this, haven't you, sis?" she'd ask, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Don't worry, Preston's covering your share. It's the least we can do." Each question was a carefully aimed dart, each remark a fresh turn of the knife. They were reinforcing the narrative they had written for me. Luna, the poor, struggling failure, the black sheep, the charity case, pathetically trying to play dress-up in a world she didn't belong to. They had no concept of my reality, no desire to understand it. They were happy in the little box they had built for me. And when Ben returned with the recooked fish, a fresh, identical, and perfectly cooked plate I had instructed the kitchen to fire, Preston still sniffed at it with suspicion before deigning to eat it. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut with one of my Japanese knives. I had watched them. I had listened. I had endured. And every condescending word, every dismissive glance, was like a blunt knife sawing away at my soul. They weren't just criticizing food, they were trampling on 5 years of my sweat, my blood, my tears. And have you ever felt that? Have you ever poured your heart and soul into something, a project, a piece of art, a garden, only to have it casually dismissed or ridiculed by the very people whose approval you once craved? It's a pain worse than hatred. It's the soul-crushing pain of absolute, utter disregard. And in that moment, I knew enough. This play needed a final act. In the dessert course arrived, a final piece of edible theater. It was a perfect sphere of dark Valrhona, chocolate, shimmering under the soft lights. The waiter began to pour a stream of hot, salted caramel sauce over the top, and the sphere melted away dramatically, revealing a heart of coconut sorbet and fresh raspberries nestled inside. It was a moment of magic, of culinary delight. In a moment Savannah decided to ruin. Gone, she didn't even taste it. She simply put her fork down with a sharp click against the porcelain, and her face crumpled. The tears came on cue, glistening in her eyes as she turned to Preston. "No, Preston, I can't take this anymore," she choked out, her voice thick with manufactured sorrow. "We tried so hard to have one perfect evening to celebrate us, and she's ruined it. She just came here to make us all uncomfortable. She's jealous of my happiness." Every head at the table swiveled to face me, a jury of 4 delivering a swift, silent verdict of guilty. My father's face was a thundercloud of fury. He slammed his hand lightly on the table, just enough to make the silverware jump. "Luna," he growled, his voice low and dangerous, "for look what you've done to your sister. Apologize to her, now." And I remained silent, my eyes fixed on Savannah's flawless performance. She was a master of her craft, weaponizing her fragility with the skill of a seasoned actress. My mother leaned across the table and grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, her diamond rings digging into my skin. "No, Luna, please stop this," she pleaded, her voice a stage whisper. "And I know life has been difficult for you, but being jealous of your own sister is just unseemly. You should be happy for her. Just apologize to Savannah and Preston, darling. For me, don't spoil this important night. In Preston, seizing his moment to be the valiant protector, wrapped his arm around Savannah's trembling shoulders. He looked at me, his face a mask of condescending pity. Yes, Luna, Savannah's right. If you couldn't afford a place like this, you should have just said so. We could have gone somewhere more appropriate for you. There was no need to act out like this just to get attention. Inting woman, that was it. The final drop, the one that causes the flood. Isn't his words, appropriate for you, get attention, landed not with a sting, but with the deafening clang of a prison door slamming shut. They were trying to lock me back into the tiny, pathetic box they had designed for me years ago. The box labeled Heart Failure, Duckgay. And a strange, terrifying calm washed over me. The knot of anger and hurt in my stomach didn't disappear, but it solidified, transforming from a hot, churning mess into something cold and heavy, like a block of granite. And slowly, deliberately, I folded my linen napkin and placed it on the table beside my plate. And I lifted my head and looked at each of them, one by one. I met my father's furious glare, my mother's pleading eyes, my brother's bored indifference, and Savannah's triumphant, tear-streaked face. The years of practiced hurt vanished from my expression, replaced by a glacial composure that was so foreign it startled even me. I saw the flicker of confusion in their eyes. They were expecting tears. They were expecting a scene. And I gave them neither. And I didn't shout. My voice, when it came, was even, clear, and carried across the table with unnerving clarity. Get attention, I repeated, the words feeling strange on my tongue. Was appropriate? And a small, humorless smile touched my lips. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My eyes were ice. Inns, you're right, I said, my gaze sweeping over their stunned faces. This place, it really isn't appropriate for you. In the cryptic words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. The confusion on their faces deepened, morphing into wary apprehension. The dynamic had shifted, the power balance tilting on an invisible axis. Ace and I caught Julian's eye across the room. I gave him the signal we had rehearsed, a single decisive nod. And now, I thought. And this moment of defiance, this cold, hard resolve, settling in my bones, wasn't a spontaneous eruption of emotion. It was a calculated detonation. The foundations for this entire evening, for this precise moment of reckoning, had been laid that very morning in the quiet, controlled hum of my kitchen before the chaos of service began. And the memory was sharp and crystal clear. I was in the walk-in cooler, inspecting a new delivery of delicate, earthy morel mushrooms. Their unique, honeycomb-like structure was a testament to their quality, and I was gently turning one over in my fingers, planning a new special. Julian stood beside me, his notepad in hand, the cool air misting around us. "They're coming tonight," I had said, my voice low and even, a stark contrast to the nervous flutter in my stomach. "And what's the script, Chef?" Julian asked. His expression was serious, his loyalty unwavering. He knew my family only through the fragmented, painful stories I had shared over the years during late-night cleanups. He knew the ghosts I was about to face. "Tenue, the script is that I am a nobody," I replied, meeting his gaze, my own eyes reflecting the cold steel of the shelves around us. "Hey, just a guest, their struggling daughter, the one who made the wrong choice. I want you and the entire staff to treat me that way. No special attention, no deference, nothing that would give the game away." I paused, emphasizing the next critical point. "Fix, but the food and the service must be utterly unimpeachably flawless. So flawless that their inevitable criticisms become absurd. I want their ignorance to be the star of the show, not my cooking. And Julian nodded slowly, a flicker of grim understanding in his eyes. He knew this wasn't about food anymore. And the check? He asked, anticipating the next move. "Non, just the wine, I said, a cold, hard glint entering my eye. Just the obscenely expensive Dom Perignon they're so fond of. Let them see the total for that. Let them think they're doing me a massive favor, graciously covering my expensive taste in alcohol. Let them feel magnanimous." I took a breath, the cold air filling my lungs. "And Julian, make sure Mr. Miller's reservation is at table 12, the one with a clear, unobstructed view of our table. I want him to have a good seat for the performance." And my secret weapon tonight wasn't anger, though I had plenty of it. It wasn't even revenge, though a part of me craved it. My weapon was the simple, unassailable truth, served on a series of pristine porcelain plates. It was the years of sacrifice distilled into a perfect sauce. It was the encyclopedic knowledge of my craft, the relentless, obsessive pursuit of perfection. My power wasn't in my bank account, though that was now considerable. It was in the perfectly seared, crispy skin of the black cod. It was in the delicate, ethereal balance of the yuzu mist. It was in the dozens of glowing, laudatory reviews from the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and Condé Nast Traveler that were discreetly but deliberately framed in the private hallway leading to the restrooms. On my ultimate weapon was the stark, undeniable contrast between their small, bitter words and the loud, resounding chorus of praise from the rest of the culinary world. Each petty insult they hurled, each ignorant critique, didn't diminish my work. It only served to brilliantly illuminate their own profound and willful lack of taste. They thought they were judging me, but all they were doing was exposing themselves, layer by pathetic layer. I had spent 5 long, hard years preparing for this moment, not out of spite, but out of a deep, driving need to prove my worth to the only person whose opinion mattered anymore, myself. I didn't need to lie. I didn't need to embellish or argue. I just needed to set the stage and let reality speak for itself. And now, as I sat at the table, all the pieces were perfectly in place. The curtain was rising on the final, explosive act. In my single, decisive nod to Julian was the signal. I watched as he moved with his practiced, professional grace toward our table. In his hand, he held a sleek, black leather billfolder, the instrument of reckoning. He approached Preston directly, not me, maintaining the carefully constructed charade to the very end. My eyes flickered for a second to table 12. Mr. Miller was there, observing quietly, a glass of red wine in his hand. Julian had briefed him that morning. He wasn't here to intervene or rescue me. He was here as a silent witness, a quiet, powerful testament to the truth of my success. His mere presence in the room was a subtle but potent confirmation of the world I now inhabited. A world my family couldn't even begin to comprehend. Every piece on the chessboard was exactly where I had placed it. The self-righteous king, the manipulative queen, the arrogant knight, the complicit bishop, all of them blissfully trapped in a game they didn't even know they were playing. And I, the pawn they had so carelessly sacrificed years ago, had painstakingly crossed the board and become a queen. Julian presented the billfolder to Preston. The air was thick with a palpable anticipation that only I seemed to feel. My family was relaxing now, basking in the false glow of their perceived victory over my sullen, jealous mood. Savannah was whispering to my mother, likely planning her wedding seating chart, a world where I would be seated at the furthest, most insignificant table. My father was already scrolling through his emails again, his duty as a parent for the evening complete. Ethan Preston took the bill, a smug, proprietary look on his face. He reached for his wallet, his movements ostentatious and slow, ready to perform the grand, magnanimous gesture of paying the check. He was ready to pull out his gleaming black American Express Centurion card, the ultimate symbol of the status he so desperately craved. And he opened the leather folder. "Now let's see here," he murmured, his voice dripping with condescension, loud enough for me to hear. John Preston stared at the bill inside the sleek leather folder, his smug, self-satisfied expression slowly curdling into one of genuine confusion, his brow furrowed in a deep line. He blinked, reading the single, elegant line of text again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense to him. Finally, he looked up and waved a dismissive hand at Julian, his irritation palpable. "Hey," he called out, his voice sharp and carrying across the hushed restaurant. "There's a mistake here, a big one." He tapped the bill with a manicured finger. "This only lists the wine, the Dom Pérignon. Where is the charge for the food, for our dinner? We're talking thousands of dollars of food here." He looked around the table, seeking validation for this egregious error on the restaurant's part, a grand lord pointing out a flaw in his fiefdom. Julian, a pillar of professional composure, remained perfectly still. "There is no mistake, sir," he said, his voice calm, clear, and utterly professional. "The dinner has been taken care of." Preston let out a short, derisive bark of a laugh. He gestured dismissively toward me with a flick of his chin, not even deigning to look at me. "Taken care of by who?" he scoffed. "Certainly not by her." In the air crackled. The world seemed to slow down. This was the moment. The cue. And Julian turned his body slightly, a subtle but seismic shift in allegiance. He directed his full, respectful attention to me for the very first time all evening, ignoring the others at the table as if they had ceased to exist. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice now filled with the warmth and deference he had been diligently suppressing all night. "Is there a problem I can resolve for you? I only ask because your meeting with the investors from Tokyo is scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. The silence that fell upon the table was absolute, a sudden, heavy vacuum that sucked all the air out of the room. Every bit of ambient chatter, every clink of silver from neighboring tables, every distant note from the piano seemed to cease. 4 pairs of eyes, my family's eyes, swiveled to stare at me, wide with a collective, stunning disbelief. I could almost hear the gears grinding in their heads, struggling to process the impossible new data points. Ms. Vance, investors, Tokyo. The words didn't fit the narrative they had so carefully constructed for me. And this was my stage now. The spotlight was mine. And slowly, deliberately, I rose to my feet. My movements were fluid and unhurried. I reached down and smoothed the front of my simple black dress. The same dress my sister had called cheap just an hour ago now felt like a suit of armor, a statement of quiet confidence. In the stunned silence of the room, it no longer looked plain. It looked powerful in its elegant minimalism. I let my gaze travel across their frozen, slack-jawed faces, savoring their shared shock like a fine, aged wine. It was a vintage I had waited a very long time to taste. "And welcome to Le Ciel," I said. My voice was quiet, but it resonated in the thick, expectant silence each word landing with the clear, final weight of a judge's gavel. I do apologize for the inconvenience. I should have been more forthcoming from the start. Aaron and I paused, letting the suspense build, letting them squirm in their confusion until it was almost unbearable. I locked eyes with my father. For the first time, he wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking at me, his expression a chaotic mixture of shock and dawning gut-wrenching horror. "And I am Luna Vance," I declared, my voice steady, strong, and ringing with the authority I had earned. "Executive chef and sole proprietor of this restaurant." And the only sound that followed was the sharp, shattering crash of a wine glass slipping from my mother's nerveless fingers and exploding on the floor. The red wine, the very same vintage they had been so enjoying, bled across the pristine white Italian marble like a fresh, accusing wound. "And you lied to us," Eleanor stammered, her hand flying to her chest, her face a mask of pale, theatrical shock. "Oh, no," I replied, my voice as cold and clean as a shard of ice. "I simply withheld the truth. I conducted an experiment. I wanted to see, after 5 long years, how my own family would treat me when they believed I was still a failure. And now," I said, letting my eyes drift over each of their stunned faces, "a scientist observing her results, I have my answer." Imre and I turned my full attention to my sister, who was staring at me as if I had sprouted a second head. "In Savannah," I said, my voice dangerously soft, cutting through her daze, "you found the scallop tartare to be raw and weird. Bon Appetit magazine, in their feature last month, called it a stroke of genius. You may have a law degree from Stanford, darling, but I'm afraid your palate is tragically, disappointingly underdeveloped." And Savannah flinched as if I had physically slapped her, a faint blush creeping up her neck. Chloe and I then shifted my gaze to Preston, who looked as if he was trying to swallow a stone. He was no longer the smug alpha male. He was just a small man in an expensive suit, suddenly out of his depth. And you, Preston," I continued, the corner of my mouth twitching with a smile that held no warmth, only triumph. "You sent back my Alaskan black cod, claiming it was undercooked. That's fascinating, because just last week, Chef Gordon Ramsay tweeted to his 10 million followers that he would fly to LA just to have that very dish again." I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Perhaps I should send him your notes on how to cook it properly." His face went from pale to a blotchy, mortified red. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, no sound coming out. And I straightened up, my spine a rod of steel. The years of feeling small and invisible in their presence, of shrinking myself to fit their expectations, had vanished. They were burned away by the cleansing fire of this one perfect moment. I felt 10 feet tall. For so long their opinion of me had been the sun my sad little world revolved around. I had yearned for their approval, for a single crumb of validation from their table. Now their shock and embarrassment meant nothing more to me than the dust motes dancing in the chandelier light. It was a hollow, empty victory in some ways, but it was a victory nonetheless. The power they had held over me for 29 long years had been a phantom, a ghost in my own mind, and I had finally, blessedly, turned on the lights. Then my brother Carter, for the first time all evening, had put down his phone. His mouth was slightly agape, his usual mask of bored, intellectual superiority completely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. He was finally seeing me. They were all finally seeing me. Not as the black sheep, not as the disappointing daughter, not as the charity case. but as a force they had completely and utterly underestimated, a power they couldn't control. Ace and I looked at the wreckage of their arrogance, at the shattered illusions lying around them like the broken glass at my mother's feet. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The play was over. I had delivered the final line. Elle and I turned my back on them, a simple, final gesture of dismissal. The meeting with the Tokyo investors was real. My future was waiting. I had no more time to waste on the ghosts of my past. I took a single step, ready to walk away and not look back. "Luna, wait." And when the voice was my father's, it was strained, unfamiliar, utterly stripped of its usual booming authority. For the first time in as long as I could remember, it held a trace of something real. Something that sounded, to my astonishment, almost like desperation. And my father's voice, stripped of its usual booming confidence, stopped me in my tracks. "Luna, wait." And I turned slowly, facing him. The furious, dismissive patriarch was gone. In his place stood a flustered, uncertain man, his eyes wide with a confusion he couldn't conceal. The power dynamic had been so utterly inverted that he seemed lost, unsure of his next move. "In Luna," he began again, stumbling over the words. "We need to talk. About this business. It's impressive. I have connections. I can help you expand. We can franchise." Inai held up a hand, a simple gesture that silenced him instantly. I looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time he didn't look away. "Can help me?" I asked, my voice devoid of anger, filled only with a quiet, sad clarity. 5 years ago, when I was desperate for help, when a single word of encouragement from you would have meant the world to me, what did you say? I didn't wait for an answer. You said, "Don't expect a single dime." You made your position perfectly clear then, Father. So let me make mine clear now. I don't need your money anymore, and I certainly don't need your advice. My mother rushed forward, her hands fluttering nervously. "Luna, darling, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. We had no idea. I've always been so proud of you." In a dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. "Proud?" I questioned, shaking my head slowly. "Let's be honest, Mother. Are you proud of my success, or are you simply relieved that I am no longer the failure you were so afraid of? Pride is celebrating the journey, not just showing up for the victory parade. The two are not the same thing." Almain, her face fell, the truth of my words hitting their mark. It was Preston's turn. He had managed to compose himself, plastering a slick, apologetic smile on his face. He stepped forward, extending a hand as if we were business associates. "Luna, I am truly, deeply sorry. I was completely out of line. Your talent is just astonishing. We should talk. I think my firm could really help you." Ananai stared at his outstretched hand until he awkwardly let it drop. "Han, let me save you the trouble, Preston," I said, my voice cutting through his sycophantic drivel. "You aren't sorry for insulting me. You're just sorry you insulted someone who turned out to be useful. There's a difference." I gave him a dismissive once-over. "Thank you for the offer, but as a rule, I don't partner with people who can't tell the difference between a perfectly cooked fish and a raw one. It speaks to a certain lack of discernment." Emery and I finally turned to Savannah. She was still seated, her head bowed, staring at her hands in her lap. The triumphant tears were gone, replaced by what looked like genuine shame. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Amy and you," I said, and to my own surprise, my voice softened slightly. The venom was gone, replaced by a weary sort of finality. "Don't you ever let anyone, not Dad, not Mom, not him," I gestured vaguely at Preston, "not anyone, define your worth. Learn that now, and you'll be happier for it. Tonight's lesson wasn't just for me. In and I looked at them one last time, this strange, broken quartet of people who shared my blood but not my heart. The anger had finally dissipated, leaving behind a vast, quiet emptiness. It wasn't triumph I felt, but a profound sense of release. The heavy chains of their expectations, of my desperate need for their approval, had finally rusted through and fallen away. I was free. "And I didn't build this place for your approval," I said, speaking to all of them, and to the younger version of myself who had cried in a back alley. "I didn't do any of this for you. I did it because I love it. I did it because it's who I am." I looked at Savannah again. "I'll be at your wedding, and if you'd like, my wedding gift to you and Preston will be a private dinner for the family here at Le Ciel." I saw a flicker of hope in my mother's eyes, and I quickly extinguished it. "But this time," I added, my voice firm and clear, "you will come as my guests, and you will come with respect." On with that, I turned and walked away, leaving them sitting in the ruins of their own arrogance. I didn't look back. And Julian was waiting for me by the door to the private dining room, a small, proud smile on his face. "Kenim, they're waiting for you, chef," he said softly. It and I took a deep breath, pushing the image of my family from my mind. The weight was gone. The air in my lungs felt clean and new. One chapter had closed, a new one was beginning. 6 months have passed since that night. The aftershocks have long since settled, and a quiet, steady peace has taken their place. I'm sitting in my office at Le Ciel, a serene space with a large window overlooking the herb garden I planted myself. The late afternoon sun streams in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On my desk, in front of me, sits the manuscript for my first cookbook, and the title on the cover page reads, "My Mother's Kitchen." It's a title with a quiet, dual meaning that is just for me. The mother of the title isn't Eleanor Vance, the woman who gave birth to me but never knew me. It's Dolores, the woman who truly raised me, the spiritual mother who nurtured my soul. I turn to the first page, the dedication page, and with a pen filled with black ink, I write the words I've held in my heart for years. And for Dolores, who taught me that the soul of a dish comes not from the price of its ingredients, but from the love in the hands that create it. Deny pause, then add one more line. And for anyone who has ever felt more at home in the kitchen than in the living room. Sinai kept my promise to Savannah. Her wedding went on as planned, though Preston's demeanor was noticeably more subdued. I hosted a private, elegant dinner for the immediate family at Le Ciel a week before the ceremony. There were no insults this time, no condescending remarks. The air was thick with an awkward, unspoken tension, but beneath it, there was a fragile glimmer of something new. Hope, perhaps. After the dessert course, Savannah quietly came over to me and whispered a simple, sincere, "I'm sorry, Luna, for everything." It wasn't a magic wand. It didn't erase years of pain, but it was a start. Our relationship will never be perfect, but it has begun again, this time on a new foundation of truth and a hard-won mutual respect. Sometimes she stops by the restaurant unannounced, not as a Vance demanding the best table, but just as a younger sister coming to see her older one. My parents have not, and I have learned to be okay with that. I've accepted that some doors are meant to stay closed. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of waiting for an apology that will never come. And tonight, the restaurant is buzzing. It's a busy Saturday service, the busiest night of the week. I'm not in my office anymore. I'm standing in the heart of the kitchen, my kitchen, wearing my crisp white chef's jacket. The chaotic symphony of sounds surrounds me, the sharp, rhythmic chop of knives on wooden boards, the fiery sizzle of fish hitting a hot pan, the chorus of voices calling out orders and confirmations. In Yes Chef, you order up. If fire two cod, one risotto. This is not noise to me. This is my life's music. In I look at the young, passionate chefs on the line, their faces flushed with heat and concentration, their movements a blur of focused energy. I see the same fire in their eyes that burned in mine all those years ago. I see a young woman no older than I was when I started, carefully plating a dish, her brow furrowed with intense focus. I walk over, taste a drop of her sauce, and suggest a tiny pinch more of salt. She nods gratefully, a look of respect in her eyes. And in that moment, I realize what true success feels like. It's not the Michelin star that now graces our entrance, though I am proud of it. It's not the glowing reviews or the magazine covers. Those are just byproducts. The real success, the most profound victory, was the courage to choose my own path, to live a life that was authentically mine, even when it meant walking away from everything I had ever known. It's the quiet joy of finding a family in the most unexpected of places. It's the alchemy of turning the scars of the past not into bitterness, but into a source of strength and empathy, a well from which I can create beauty. And I found myself not when the world finally decided to approve of me, but in the long, lonely, arduous journey of approving of myself. And that, I've learned, is the most delicious success of all. And thank you for listening to my story. The journey wasn't easy, but finding the courage to define my own worth was the greatest recipe I ever created. Maybe you have a similar story, a moment you chose yourself over the expectations of others. I would be honored to read about it in the comments below. Senior stories matter. They remind us that we are not alone. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to our channel, Chosen Revenge, for more true stories that empower and inspire. Until next time, be true to yourself. It. Check it